Welcome to TFiR Insights, and I'm your host, Swapnil Bhartia. My next guest is, once again, Rob Hirschfeld, CEO and co-founder of RackN. Rob, it's great to have you back on the show.
It's exciting to be here.
Today, we are going to talk about bare metal. Whether we talk about function as service, whether we talk about serverless, there is a server, there is a data center, and there is some bare metal underneath all of it. So can you talk about the importance of bare metal in today's modern cloud-centric world?
Bare metal is absolutely essential for cloud infrastructure. And as much as we do talk about serverless and things like that, there is always bare metal behind the scenes. But the reason we talk about serverless is because a lot of people don't want to worry about bare metal. So it's always there, but usually so deeply buried in somebody's infrastructure stack, they don't worry about it much. It does pop up all the time. There are times when we get much closer to the bare metal. Companies who are running their own on-premises or co-load infrastructures or edge, do care about bare metal, and it's a very serious topic from that perspective. And RackN specializes in automating bare metal. It's sort of our roots. And at the same time, we know our customers don't want to spend any time at all thinking about it. So it's a bit of a paradox from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to name any cloud provider, but they do talk about, hey, serverless, you don't have to worry about all those nitty-gritties and all those underneath plumbing. All you have to worry about is pay for what you use. But the fact is that they do themselves worry about what is underneath, because you have to make it simple for others, but you have to deal with all the complexities so you can make it easier and simpler for each other. So can you talk about, if you look at from behind the scenes perspective, what is the state of bare metal? Let's talk about, whether you're talking about new chips, whether you're talking M1 is there, whether you're talking provisioning, ARM is also making serious inroads there. So let's just talk about what is going on.
I'm glad you asked, because a lot of people assume with cloud that bare metal is just a dead thing. And it couldn't be further from the truth. The reality here is that bare metal and innovations going on at the server platform level are dramatic. You mentioned ARM. This is the first time in my 25 years of data center experience that we've actually had a real contender for an alternate architecture back from the days when we were talking about Spark and RISC and things like that. So things are really interesting, but it's not just ARM versus i86 Intel. AMD is actually coming in really strong into the data center infrastructure market, and we're seeing a lot of disruption and potential change as companies look at alternatives to Intel that aren't just a completely new architecture. And then SmartNICs are coming in as a platform and creating opportunities there. And a lot of those are going to be ARM and i86, AMD 64 type architectures mixed together. It's crazy, right? And Edge, we haven't even talked about the heterogeneity at Edge, where it's everything under the sun.
As these new architectures are coming in, what does it really mean for end users who are simply consuming cloud? Because from them, it doesn't really matter much. But for you, or companies, organizations who are actually managing it, security, because totally different architecture. When we do talk about cloud native world, even when it comes to security, they only worry about their workload data. But here we are talking about the layer that goes all the way down to the Linux kernel. So from the back end, what kind of challenges these new architecture pose for you when you are provisioning it, automating it, and dealing with all other complexities?
Yeah, complexity is the operative word here, and heterogeneity is a really big challenge. And one of the things that people overlook is, even if the new architectures and new abstractions are wonderful, right? A lot of people get excited about out-of-band management using Redfish. It doesn't help you unless you can also solve your legacy problems. So we get into a situation where it's not as simple as, oh, I have something new, I can just replace everything that I'm doing. A lot of times what we have to think through is, this is new, how do I incorporate it with what I've already been doing? And so new things have a tendency to actually increase the complexity when they get brought into the infrastructure. And so management is a really serious component for how all of these pieces need to fit together. It is a very real component. for data center automation.
You did allude to that, but I want to go a bit deeper into why is it so hard to deal with? I mean, of course, you have explained in detail either way. Why is it? The reason I'm asking is that if we do look at the old data center days, it was a big mess, and I think that's one of the reasons why people embrace cloud, because they do not have to worry about, they can immediately go to market and done. I'm not even talking about procuring hardware, I'm just talking about so much other things that come with bare metal, but you still have to deal with it.
I'm glad you're asking the question, because a lot of people think that they can solve this problem very simply, that they just have to set things up and then walk away, or they can just solve their immediate problem. And they don't think through how much things change. And the thing I always come back to is what I call necessary complexity. A lot of people think hardware is a big mess and it's just way too complex, and they don't want to have to worry about setting BIOS and out-of-band management and their NIC interfaces and having multiple storage devices and RAID arrays. I mean, the fact is, to make a server work, you have to get all those things right. And each server, each vendor has variance in that. There is not a standard server. Even the open source stuff is actually more variant than the proprietary pieces, because the proprietary vendors actually work to make their own tools at least consistent, generally consistent, generation to generation. But when you add something new into the system or a new capability, that does cause change. And those changes add up in ways that you have to reflect in how you manage and automate the systems. And that really is, we spend a lot of time at RackN thinking through how do we make a consistent, repeatable experience that is multi-vendor. And one of the ways we do that is we accept that vendors have differences, hardware models have differences. And then we look for the commonalities and iterate across that. But I think everybody who plays in the cloud and thinks, oh, I just talk to an API, I get a server back, that abstraction is useful until you need to, actually manage the BIOS or set something specifically or optimize networking. Those are real challenges, and they do have to be solved by somebody in an organization. And you might not be worrying about it, but if your company isn't doing a good job doing that, or using somebody who does a good job doing that, then everything you've built on top of that stack is going to be fragile. It's going to be unreliable. It might be more expensive than it needs to be. It might not be secure. So these are things where, when we talk about bare metal and getting bare metal right, it's not as simple as installing an operating system, right? That's actually the least complex thing that we have to do. It comes down to doing all of the work to make that operating system installation easy, fast, and efficient. And then doing the work so that when a patch comes out, you can apply the patch and reset and continue, or repave the whole environment as an infrastructure pipeline. That is really what bare metal is about. And it's easy to think of bare metal as just a provisioner, but it's not, right? Our customers know that it's actually part of an integrated system for running a data center. It's never just one thing.
Bare metal still matters, as you already explained, but who does it matter to, or who still cares about it?
What we find in organizations is they typically silo out, and they think that they can ignore it by farming it out to somebody else or having a team that deals with it. And we see this all the time. Our customers have a bare metal team, or a rack and stack team, or sometimes we call them quick, meaning that you call the data center and quick, fix my server for me. The idea here is that attitude, that's sort of a last generation attitude that's pre-cloud. And what we found is a lot of companies are starting to break out of this mold where they think hardware is something they can, set out as hey, I don't have to worry about it, get it to me, get it all right, and then I'll just I won't worry about it anymore. And the more advanced companies, what they're seeing is that they have to treat the hardware as part of their infrastructure stack, and they're actually thinking about it as an integrated whole, which is very cloud-like thinking. And that's, I think, a really positive change that we're seeing when people talk about bare metal. And the conversation about bare metal today is actually much more productive than it was even 5 years ago. Today, we're talking about building systems where the bare metal is integrated into the overall workflow, where we're actually making time to automate RAID and BIOS configuration, getting the operating system tuned, being able to do a reset and reprovision, and caring about how the network topology is built. That's what bare metal is. What our companies are saying overwhelmingly, and we hear loud and clear, is that they don't want to have conversations about type 1 infrastructure, type 2 infrastructure, something completely different. They really just want infrastructure to be infrastructure. And that to me is the right thing for bare metal. It's not, can I make bare metal better? It's actually, can I make bare metal equivalent to every other type of infrastructure that I have? That's the conversation. How do I make infrastructure cloud-like infrastructure? How do I make my edge, where bare metal is really important to management, just like everything else? The idea that we're going to manage all these things as completely separate silos, it's just not a sustainable model.
Right. I also want to talk about I don't know if the end user is the right term, but developers, DevOps,
Yeah.
evolution of SREs, and you mentioned everything is code, infrastructure as a code, GitOps. So, should these communities also care about bare metal? It, of course, depends on the use case. And if they do, why?
So these communities care about infrastructure pipelines, or CI/CD pipelines, where they're going from code to delivery in a continuous fashion. And more, those companies do care about infrastructure. So from that perspective, owning the stack, understanding how all the pieces fit together is very important, right? Amazon had a major outage because they lost track of the fact that they didn't have enough file handles to run the systems that they were deploying. Totally understandable challenge. And it matters how these things get set up, and companies and developers do care about how those pipelines are being set. And that's part of the really impressive thing about DevOps and SRE cultures at companies, is that they're actually building an integrated system, and they're looking at all the components. The fact of bare metal shouldn't be a specialized thing. It should be just part of the infrastructure that people are working with. There are more things to set, and there are more things to take care of. But talking about bare metal, it's like talking about running marathons as opposed to just running. It's harder. It requires you to do some more training and some more work. But at the end of the day, it really is running. And so you want to be able to handle that as part of everything you do. And I'll tell you something that's really important for our customers, is that they've realized that when they have good infrastructure processes, adding bare metal into an infrastructure process is a small lift, right? And that lets them stop thinking about bare metal as a specialty that's only handled by a few people or a sub team. What they're really looking at is how they build all of their infrastructure automation processes, and then driving that all the way down into bare metal infrastructure. And that's really important. The other thing I would say that's helpful here is finding ways to avoid toil around bare metal. The reality that we see with our customers is they've spent a lot of person years building tools that are completely generic in abstraction, setting RAID and BIOS, interfacing to a vendor's out-of-band management infrastructure, writing their own provisioner. Those aren't particularly useful things. They're not even useful from an open source perspective, because at the end of the day, what you're doing in your data center is bespoke enough that you have to be able to handle it. Nobody's going to get on the phone with you out of the grace of their heart. And yet, you do want to not continue to write your own versions of those things. And that's what we find is really helpful for customers. Common patterns, repeatable use, standard tooling and processes. In those ways, you can help somebody who's actually solved this already not have to learn it again. We see this over and over again. When we help one customer fix a bug in how BIOS is deployed, everybody gets the benefit of that, and then they don't have to discover it on their own. And that's a major change in the industry, right? Where you're not toiling through data center operations over and over again. You're actually doing it more in a community-minded way.
As we talk about edge, which we discussed earlier, is a totally different beast altogether. where you're not talking about hyperscale provider who are handling with hardware. When you're talking about edge, you may or may not be dealing with the actual hardware which is deployed at the edge. And we're not talking about IoT devices, we are talking about the edge small data centers. As edge becomes more and more popular, adoption grows, just the way we have seen that a developer is getting no pun in a lot of things in their pipeline. Their role is evolving from just developers. They have to do the security, they have to do the site reliability. A lot of things are changing. Don't you think that edge might one day also add hardware management as part of their portfolio?
The idea of doing edge without doing hardware management is ridiculous. Edge will require hardware management. It is by definition infrastructure that's in a remote location, and you're not going to send IT people in crash carts. You're going to have it self-managed or managed by non-skilled people. So edge is first and foremost a hardware management problem. And the people who think that they're just going to send you a box or something like that aren't really thinking through the overall problem, because it's an ongoing hardware management challenge. Security is very important. Patching is important. Building a whole stack, treating it as a unit. These are core problems for the edge. The reality is they're actually core problems for all infrastructure management. And so the thing that we see is that treating edge has additional challenges, but it's not unique challenges. And so as we get better about doing edge and managing many, many data centers, thousands in the edge use cases, we're actually solving the same problems that we need to solve in generalized data center infrastructure. And that's one of the things that we hear a lot is people like to think of edge as being lots of mini clouds, because they want cloud APIs and cloud behaviors and process to apply to the edge. And while I don't think that's a practical thing, we're not going to have tiny cloud infrastructures with all the services and capabilities and management that you would have if you were talking about a cloud and the elasticity. Those aren't realities in edge. But the idea that you're going to treat edge differently at the application development level and the process automation level is also not correct. So edge can't be that different than cloud from a consumption perspective, at least in how we deal with automation and processes and things like that. So we have a paradox in how we look at edge. It's going to be incredibly heterogeneous, very limited. It's going to have to be much more autonomous than we're used to dealing with. And it's also going to have to feel very comfortable to people who are used to dealing with cloud. And that's one of the challenges as we build automation and we look at what bare metal would be in these circumstances. When I talk about bare metal being another type of infrastructure, that's where we think edge becomes successful. Because if you can treat bare metal as infrastructure, then all of a sudden these challenges that we just laid out at the edge become solvable. And that's where edge really can take off. Until we've solved these fundamental management problems for edge, it's always going to be very expensive infrastructure when it actually needs to be very cheap infrastructure.
Rob, thank you so much for talking about bare metal. This is, as you rightly said, this is not a topic that most people want to talk about, but this is a topic we should talk about, especially in the edge space. So thank you for the discussion, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you.
Swap, it's a pleasure. Thank you.